Hey, you. Welcome back to Secrets with Maeve, the space for the conversations we usually keep to ourselves. I'm Maeve. Today, we're talking about something I know so many of us struggle with in silence. She texts first every time, here's why you're all she thinks about. Let's get into it. She didn't change suddenly. You just didn't understand what was happening. That's the subtle truth most men miss when they notice her thinking about them. At first, it might feel like a coincidence, a fleeting moment of attention, or even a casual glance, but over time, the signs become harder to ignore. She's lingering in your messages longer than before. She's asking about your day more frequently. She seems almost present in your world, even when she's not physically there. And yet there's a quiet confusion that accompanies these behaviors. You're unsure why she's acting differently, why your presence seems to matter more now, and why sometimes it feels like she's both distant and close at the same time. This is where most men misunderstand what's happening. They look at the surface, the smiles, the glances, the texts, and interpret them as either casual interest or romantic intent. But what's actually happening beneath the surface is far more complex. When a woman thinks about someone constantly, it isn't always about attraction in the way you imagine. It's about attention, emotional mapping, and the subtle ways her mind prioritizes people who intrigue her emotionally and mentally. She's processing possibilities, testing boundaries, and assessing value, often without even realizing the depth of her own thoughts. You see, human attention is a limited resource. The things we spend the most mental energy on reveal our priorities, whether consciously or subconsciously. When a woman is thinking about you constantly, she is not just noticing you. She is mentally rehearsing interactions, imagining outcomes, and evaluating how you fit into her life and emotional landscape. She might replay conversations in her head, analyze your tone, or even anticipate your reactions. This is why her attention feels persistent, almost magnetic, and why you may sense her presence even in silence. But here's the subtlety that confuses so many men. The frequency of thought does not always translate to visible action. She may not reach out as often as you expect, or she may appear aloof in public settings. What's actually happening beneath the surface is a quiet internal dialogue. She is considering her feelings, weighing possibilities, and sometimes even protecting herself from vulnerability. This mental activity is deeply human, but it can be misinterpreted if you only focus on what she does instead of why she does it. It's also important to recognize that these thought patterns are rarely linear. Her mind may switch rapidly between curiosity, attraction, caution, and doubt. You might notice small behaviors that seem inconsistent. She laughs one moment, withdraws the next. This is not a reflection of her uncertainty about you personally. It's a reflection of her complex internal processing. Women tend to evaluate relational dynamics more holistically, meaning they simultaneously consider emotional safety, social context, and long-term compatibility. In essence, when a woman can't stop thinking about you, she is engaging in a deep cognitive process that combines desire, curiosity, and self-protection. She's not just thinking, she's strategizing, emotionally rehearsing, and understanding her own reactions to you. This is why subtle signals are so powerful. A lingering glance, an intentional pause in conversation, or even a carefully crafted message can reveal more than hours of surface-level interaction. The confusion you feel is natural because human behavior rarely reveals itself plainly. She doesn't announce, "I'm thinking about you all the time," because that level of transparency is uncommon. Instead, you observe patterns, inconsistencies, and moments of heightened attention. Your task, if you choose to engage psychologically, is to decode these patterns without jumping to assumptions or letting frustration cloud your perception. Understanding the why behind her attention creates clarity. Misreading the signals, on the other hand, leads to emotional dissonance, overanalysis, and missed opportunities to respond in ways that align with her deeper emotional processes. By the end of this exploration, you'll realize that noticing her attention is only the beginning. What matters is understanding the mental and emotional mechanisms that drive her focus. Once you see the underlying structure, the confusion fades, replaced by insight. A calm awareness that allows you to navigate her mind with intelligence rather than assumption. The key to understanding why she can't stop thinking about you lies in the psychology of attachment, cognitive focus, and emotional resonance. These are not abstract concepts. They are measurable patterns of human behavior. Women in particular often engage in what psychologists call emotional scanning, where they evaluate not just what a person does, but how that person makes them feel, how they imagine interactions, and what the potential risks and rewards are. What most men overlook is that thought is the precursor to action. Before a woman approaches, texts, or mirrors your behavior, she has already run countless internal simulations. She has imagined conversations, measured her responses, and even rehearsed her tone. Every glance she casts, every smile she shares, and every small interaction carries the residue of these internal rehearsals. This is where the fascination begins. She's not passively thinking. She's actively mapping you into her emotional and social world. Another critical factor is the concept of emotional triggers. Women respond to cues that resonate with their needs, desires, or insecurities. If she can't stop thinking about you, it's likely that you have activated one or more of these triggers. Perhaps your confidence, unpredictability, humor, or even subtle vulnerability. The more emotionally evocative you are, the more her mind will naturally return to you, dissecting interactions and outcomes to better understand how you fit into her life. There's also a neurological component to this. Human brains are wired to focus attention on what matters most, not just in a cognitive sense, but in an emotional and chemical sense. Neurochemicals like dopamine are released when there is anticipation, curiosity, or emotional reward. When she thinks about you constantly, her brain is essentially rewarding itself by revisiting thoughts and imagined interactions. This creates a feedback loop. The more she thinks, the more she anticipates, and the more emotionally attached she becomes, even subconsciously. But it's not only about desire. There is a layer of self-reflection involved. Women often analyze their own reactions as much as they analyze yours. She may ask herself questions she doesn't even vocalize. Why do I feel drawn to him? Or what would it mean if I let myself care more? These internal questions reflect a complex interplay between curiosity, self-protection, and emotional evaluation. She is not acting impulsively. She is strategizing her attention, weighing the potential outcomes of vulnerability, and understanding the value you represent in her relational ecosystem. Here's where the common misunderstandings arise. Men tend to equate attention with immediate intention. A woman thinking about you isn't necessarily planning her next move. She is processing layers of emotion, social context, and potential consequences. She is mentally rehearsing scenarios where you might respond, testing boundaries, and evaluating how her feelings align with her values and long-term goals. This is why signals can appear inconsistent. She might withdraw in one moment and engage in another. Both are part of the same mental strategy, a subtle calibration of emotional investment and social awareness. The psychological takeaway is profound. Her persistent thoughts indicate mental prioritization. You occupy space in her cognitive and emotional landscape because she is evaluating compatibility, emotional resonance, and risk. She is not just interested in the casual sense. She is mentally processing you as a potential element of her life. This is the hidden layer most men miss. Understanding this framework allows you to interpret behaviors not as contradictions, but as expressions of cognitive and emotional evaluation. Finally, recognizing these patterns equips you with emotional insight. You no longer need to guess or overanalyze isolated behaviors. Instead, you observe her actions through a psychological lens, seeing not just what she does, but why she does it. This awareness transforms confusion into clarity, curiosity into understanding, and attention into meaningful engagement. Now that we understand why she thinks about you, it's time to look at the hidden patterns in her behavior, the subtle signals that most men completely overlook. These are not dramatic or obvious gestures. They are the small, consistent indicators that reveal her mental preoccupation. When a woman can't stop thinking about you, she often demonstrates behaviors that on the surface seem minor or even contradictory. But these patterns are the breadcrumbs that, when read correctly, tell the full story. One of the first patterns is mirroring. You may notice her adopting your phrases, your tone, or even your posture during conversations. This isn't mimicry for the sake of imitation. Psychologically, mirroring is a form of subconscious connection. It's her brain signaling comfort, attention, and alignment. When she reflects your behavior, it's a subtle way of saying, without words, I'm mentally and emotionally attuned to you. Most men mistake this for casual rapport, but it's much deeper. It's the internal mechanism of mental resonance. Another pattern is preemptive attention. She anticipates your needs, remembers tiny details about your life, or asks about things she could easily overlook. These behaviors indicate she's mentally revisiting past interactions and projecting possible future scenarios. It's not about control or manipulation. It's about cognitive prioritization. Her mind keeps you present because she is continuously assessing how interactions unfold, how your emotional responses align with hers, and how she fits into your life emotionally. Then there's the pattern of selective engagement. Sometimes she appears distant only to return later with intense focus or interest. What's happening here is a psychological recalibration. Women tend to manage emotional resources carefully. She may withdraw when she feels uncertain or when her internal evaluation process is still active, but this withdrawal is not disinterest. It's her way of maintaining internal equilibrium while continuing to process her feelings about you. If you misread this as rejection, you overlook the deeper cognitive rhythm guiding her behavior. Emotional microsignals are another layer. Notice her subtle changes in expression when you speak. A slight lift of the eyebrows, a softening of her gaze, or a fleeting smile that appears when she hears something that resonates. These micro reactions are not conscious, but they reflect a continuous mental engagement with you. Her brain is effectively broadcasting attention, curiosity, and internal evaluation simultaneously. These tiny cues accumulate over time, forming a pattern of preoccupation that you may not consciously notice, but your subconscious certainly registers. Finally, we see behavioral consistency across contexts. A woman who is constantly thinking about you doesn't limit her attention to one mode of interaction. She remembers what you said weeks ago, comments on it in unexpected settings, or finds ways to reconnect through indirect communication. This cross-contextual consistency is a psychological signature of mental prioritization. Unlike casual interest, which fluctuates and fades quickly, persistent thought leaves traces in multiple layers of her behavior: verbal, nonverbal, and situational. Understanding these patterns transforms the way you perceive her attention. You start seeing intention, not randomness, presence, not absence. Her behaviors are not merely reactions to external stimuli. They are expressions of deep cognitive processing, emotional mapping, and subconscious evaluation. This is why men often feel confused. The signals are subtle, layered, and at times inconsistent. But once you recognize the patterns, the apparent contradictions resolve into a coherent map of her mind. The real power of recognizing these hidden patterns is that it allows you to respond intelligently without anxiety or overanalysis. Instead of chasing inconsistencies or projecting assumptions, you observe, decode, and interpret behavior through a lens of understanding. This creates emotional clarity, a calm awareness that she is thinking about you in a structured, meaningful way, and that her attention carries psychological depth, not randomness. By internalizing these hidden patterns, you no longer react to surface level actions. You respond with alignment, patience, and insight, subtly shaping interactions that respect her cognitive processes while honoring your own emotional boundaries. Now, we reach a critical point: what men misunderstand and the mindset shift that changes everything. Most men see her attention and attempt to interpret it through the lens of ego or desire. They ask, does she like me or is she interested? And judge every behavior against a simplistic metric of attraction. But what's actually happening is far more nuanced. You are focusing on what she does instead of why she does it. That misalignment is where frustration, anxiety, and misinterpretation occur. The first misunderstanding is confusing thought with action. Just because she thinks about you constantly doesn't mean she will immediately call, text, or meet you. Her mind is processing scenarios, not issuing invitations. She is weighing emotional safety, relational compatibility, and social consequences. If you try to force a reaction, you disrupt her internal process. Instead, understand that her consistent mental presence is already a form of connection, invisible, but profoundly real. Another common mistake is overvaluing inconsistency as disinterest. She may pull back or appear distant at times, and men often interpret this as rejection, but this is precisely the rhythm of female cognitive evaluation. Withdrawal and engagement are not opposites, they are part of the same strategy. Balancing curiosity with caution, attraction with emotional safety. Recognizing this allows you to read patterns without panic or projection. The third misunderstanding is seeing subtle signals as manipulation. Men often think that selective attention, microsignals, or mirroring are deliberate attempts to control them. In reality, these are unconscious reflections of her thought patterns. She is not orchestrating a game. She is processing her emotions, projecting outcomes, and internally rehearsing relational scenarios. Understanding this distinction removes frustration and fosters clarity. The mindset shift begins when you stop asking, "What does this mean about me?" and start asking, "What does this reveal about her thought process?" You transition from ego-centered interpretation to psychologically informed observation. You see her actions as reflections of mental prioritization, emotional resonance, and internal calibration, not tests, games, or random behaviors. With this shift, your responses become measured, calm, and aligned. You no longer overreact to perceived inconsistencies. You no longer chase validation or force engagement. Instead, you observe, interpret, and respond with intelligence and emotional awareness. You recognize that her constant thoughts about you are a silent form of connection, meaningful, deliberate, and internally coherent, even if they are not always outwardly expressed. This mindset also allows you to maintain control over your own emotional state. When you understand the hidden mechanics behind her attention, you stop projecting insecurity onto her behavior. You don't need constant reassurance because you can read the patterns, anticipate her focus, and respond in ways that encourage authentic engagement without forcing it. Ultimately, this is the transition from confusion to comprehension, from anxiety to insight. It's the difference between reacting to superficial behavior and responding to profound psychological truths. Once you internalize this, your interactions with her are no longer about guessing or interpreting. They become about awareness, alignment, and mutual emotional resonance. Finally, let's bring it all together with clarity, control, and emotional conclusion. Understanding that she can't stop thinking about you is more than an observation. It's a framework for navigating female psychology with awareness and respect. By now, you recognize that her persistent attention is not random. It is the product of deep mental processing, emotional evaluation, and subconscious prioritization. With this clarity, you can approach interactions calmly and intentionally. You respond to her signals with measured awareness without forcing outcomes or projecting insecurity. You understand that each micro signal, each moment of engagement or withdrawal is part of a larger cognitive and emotional map. This awareness allows you to maintain your own composure, creating a space where authentic connection can flourish. Control in this context is not dominance or manipulation. It is emotional regulation, observation, and informed response. You control your reactions, your interpretations, and your engagement rather than being pulled by confusion or assumption. By aligning your behavior with psychological insight, you create a subtle but powerful dynamic where her attention is acknowledged and reciprocated intelligently rather than exploited or misread. Emotionally, the conclusion is simple. You are no longer guessing, you are aware. You recognize that her thoughts about you carry weight even when she doesn't express them overtly. You understand the hidden patterns, the internal rehearsals, and the nuanced rhythm of engagement. You see the underlying psychology, the why behind every glance, pause, and carefully measured interaction. This insight transforms the way you relate to her. You no longer feel anxious about inconsistency. You no longer chase attention. Instead, you engage with calm awareness, understanding that her mind has already dedicated mental energy to you. Her preoccupation is a silent signal of relevance, a complex interplay of desire, curiosity, and emotional evaluation. And here's the final realization. True understanding is a form of power, but it is quiet, subtle, and respectful. It doesn't force her hand. It simply illuminates the landscape of her mind. With this perspective, every interaction becomes meaningful, every signal informative, and every moment of attention appreciated. You have moved from confusion to comprehension, from guessing to insight. If this made you see things differently, subscribe because understanding her mind changes.